So, hey everyone, thanks for coming. They want us to tell you to please remember to silence your cell phones, and also please fill out the feedback form at the end of the session. And if you didn't get your badge checked, so that you can do so. So this talk was kind of given a punchy name to kind of mask the diversity part, to trick people who wanted to see, a night fight with laser fists in a cave. But, that won't be happening. No, but congrats, you are at an important talk.
Yay!
This is perhaps a better name for the talk. So who we are, I'm Shawn Alexander Allen. I'm an artist, game designer, writer, new challenger.
Yeah, and I'm Catt Small. I am a game developer with Brooklyn Gamery. I'm also a product designer at SoundCloud and the co-founder of the Code Liberation Foundation.
Woo! So, this talk is about diversity. But by diversity, we don't just mean slapping some brown people or women in a game and calling it a day. Diversity is not just some veneer for your games to reside underneath, because when you think of it that way, it can be easily chipped away at, and it has to be something that you're not ending at the end, that you're adding towards the beginning, so that you don't end up sacrificing in the end. I mean, we're not really going for this.
Exactly. So this talk is really aimed at thinking way deeper about the games that you're making, right? What the content is, how that content informs the rest of the game. Like we build systems and we're thinking about systems from the get-go, but are we really thinking about the other parts of our games? Like who's starring in them, how would they act, and things like that. So we don't really think through a lot of things. Like we're thinking about our characters shooting, but why are they shooting, and who's in this game, and how does this uphold, for example, real world stuff that's going on. So, what's in it for you? So we're going to kind of be talking through lots of different games at various different success levels, various different build levels. We're going to be kind of be dissecting these games, talking about different genres as well, just all across the spectrum of what we call indie. And we're going to be examining what creators have done to kind of diversify the landscape, how well they did, just kind of critiquing them, the goods and the bads, and even the parts in the middle. And our goal in this talk is to show concrete examples of thinking, and talking a little bit deeper, thinking a little bit deeper than just the surface level of what diversity is. And hopefully it leads to you getting to broaden your reach, audience-wise, creating a deeper community, and even possibly changing the market and the people that you're accessing. But we also acknowledge that this is only a singular part of the equation, and there are other parts to making games, obviously. And, this is just one part of it, and it's kind of not, so this is why we're calling it Subversive. So, we're going to be discussing a couple of things, a couple of specific games here, and just to note, this isn't a value judgment on the creators. It's really just an examination of their games. We're kind of trying to examine the impact, not the intent, per se. So, let's go.
So hey, this is Catacomb Kids. It's a roguelike platformer with random character generation. It was a Kickstarter success. It earned over $30,000 on Kickstarter. It's currently in early access. Tyreek Plummer is giving a talk here, I think later today. It saw a lot of success from an awesome video about all the different things you could do with a rock, which was pretty cool, and the video kind of went viral. And we've seen a lot of roguelikes that have defined character types, skin colors, etc. But in Catacomb Kids, all of the characters have wildly different skin colors, names, stats, faces, hairstyles, and the kids are barely recognizable as gendered too. These are some of the kind of randomly generated characters from just a couple of playthroughs of the game. And the randomness of the kids supports the idea that lack of set situations with the player characters, and it upholds the idea of random generation in the game's design. And players will have to try multiple character looks. They won't necessarily get stuck on one main, and also they won't get stuck on a gendered choice off of, you could theoretically really always try to go for the dude with stats, but you might be sitting there for 20 minutes cycling through them. So it's kind of interesting how it the random choice means that you actually have to experience somebody different every time. And also it's because part of the game is like the fragility of life. So the kids die quickly, so then you just have to go get someone else, and then you don't get stuck on them. So you can kind of compare this to Spelunky, which has an interesting multi-ethnic cast, but you have to unlock many of those characters. But what's really interesting in comparison with Spelunky is a lot of people get attached to their main. I see a lot of turban-wearing people picking the turban-wearing character, which is really awesome because the character, like, those characters don't exist in games generally. But it's like, I mean, it's still filled with, you know, like, random like ethnic stereotypes, and you still have to kind of play the game for a while to find like more brown people to use. There was something, and also then that kind of brings up how because of the set characters, you can kind of pick like, you know, a black woman who's like a pirate with like an eye patch, but you can only ever rescue these 3 people, and kind of it's weird that the diversity here is like the pug is like you have 2 white people and then a dog, and you know the damsel joke's kind of tired in and of itself. But what could actually kind of use a little bit of improvement that I just think about is that, you know, what is the difference between Christina and Thomas right here? Like nothing, right? Stats or whatever. But I mean, the fact that the game kind of assigns gendered names to specific gender roles is kind of actually not super helpful. Like the game doesn't really actually gain anything from it. So another game, we all pretty much know Shovel Knight, right? It's probably one of the most mainstream independent games out there. I love the game personally. It did over $300,000 on Kickstarter. It's been a huge success, and I feel like part of that success is because the whole game has been thought through on an extra level. I think farther than a lot of different games. And it's very tight designed without necessarily becoming suffocating and trying to force players to play through it in its own designed way. But the designers thought through a lot of aspects of the game. So one thing that was interesting is that there was an article on Gamasutra where they came out and they talked about how they needed to expand the NES palette, because this is the NES palette, and the NES palette actually doesn't have many browns in it, and so for backer rewards and just for other things they needed to expand the palette. So this is one of the colors that they added to the game, and because they were saying, hey look, we're going to look at the very basic things. So a lot of people look at, you know, retro whatever, and they say we need to stick to the NES palette, but the NES palette has problems in and of itself, and they had figured out that they could add like 5 colors to actually add diversity to the game. And they also kind of were using this term gender swap for a while for a new feature, and they actually changed their marketing speak to body swap to make it less harmful and more inclusive to people. But then there's the kind of one stumbling brick where it's like, but why are their gender roles very specified as the main characters? Like, why is Shield Knight the damsel who needs rescuing? And why is she the defensive person where Shovel Knight's the guy who's the attacker? And really, like, again, what does Shovel Knight gain from being a guy?
Great, so Broken Age. Also probably heard about this game. This game's pretty popular. So it's got some really interesting things in it, right? Like firstly, it stars a black woman and a white guy. They don't have a romantic encounter, which is like also kind of cool, because a lot of times when there's people of different genders in a game, they're like romantically paired together. So that's exciting. And the other interesting thing about that, though, is that it kind of, which is a good and a bad thing, because they could have easily messed this up, it avoids the complexity of like those kinds of relationships. And some people call it like the swirl, for example. There's a lot of complexities in there. And so by not having that there, they easily avoided, you know, what could have been a mess. And it was actually funded without even having protagonists. So hats off to Tim for actually like deciding to make one of the characters a black woman. It didn't have to happen, but it did, and that was really awesome because it showed that, you know, there was some thinking there. It was a very conscious decision. And also, like, thanks to the community for not getting angry that there was a woman who was black, you know, as the star of the game, because there were other games where even just the hint of the main character being not a man, for example, Mighty Number 9, people got super angry. And the other nice thing about this is that there's actually a black voice actor for the character as well. Something that they could have thought about a little bit more is who they were marketing to. So for example, they could have actually, you know, gone to different websites like Ebony, who also runs a wonderful magazine, and there's other traditional forms of media as well that are kind of like focused at black buyers, and they could have actually, you know, had a they could have actually done something there and kind of said, hey, you know, our game is kind of unique. Would you be interested in buying it? Here's a little bit about the game. So they could have pitched that to traditional media and actually possibly open their audience even more. So on the negative side, there are hair jokes, and we've had enough of those. So there aren't a lot of black characters in games in general. There aren't a lot of black characters in this game, and yet we're making fun of black hair. It's already seen as something that's like weird or like strange or unnatural. And so just adding on this joke, which is also impossible, by the way. Like if it's open, it doesn't shake closed. Like once it's down, you have to like comb it or something. So like black hair doesn't work like that, firstly. And so it was really obvious that they had no one to say, what are you doing? So that was definitely a negative about this game.
So yeah, I mean, again, another very popular game, Crypt and NecroDancer. It's a rhythm-based roguelike. We're trying not to go too deep into stuff that probably everybody knows. But despite being like, it seems like the super niche game, it did super well. So that's really awesome. I like another game that I really love. And I really honestly want to know, like, where are my Crypt likes? Like, I just want, like, when are people going to start copying this idea and start making more stuff with it? And it's also really amazing that it stars a girl as the main character. And also, it's like the cast of the main like random characters is really cool because it's variously diverse. They have a gender non-conforming character who's brown in the game also, and also their play styles reflect their difference. Like, it's not just everybody is the exact same character pasted over. But there is a problem when you get to the same character. She is the co-op character, and there's a problem with the second player co-op character being just a palette swap of the main character. And it's like, she's black, right? But she's not really a character. Like, she doesn't have any thought. She doesn't have a story behind her. She has another name, but that doesn't actually matter. I mean, the color swap as a two-player character is kind of an old concept. I mean, no one really bought Luigi as a main character in Super Mario Brothers. Like, you never wanted to play as him. And all he did was, he was green instead of red. And so it's like when you make her black instead of white, it's like, like there's literally nothing about her that's interesting. And I felt like I was just kind of curious why. I mean, this is what has been done actually traditionally. Like on top, the guy is obviously modeled after Mel Gibson. On the bottom, the other guy is modeled after nobody at all. So like Danny Glover actually doesn't even make doesn't make an appearance. And if you actually look really closely at the in-game screenshot, they have the same head. They put more detail into his suit than they did in changing his head and his hairstyle. And then there's also this and I'm harping on this a little bit just because this is kind of very important. Like, you can't see her on that background. Like, her hair, and it's a problem that's in film, it's in photography, stockings that come in nude that are peach, and it's like the generic, like the default for film was white people. Like, that's why like film looks bad with black people. That's why people don't know how to do makeup for them. That's why it's like this whole revolution now. But it's funny because when you think about something and you're just like, hey, we're just going to do that, it's like she doesn't pop from the background. She's not a main character. And there wasn't a whole lot of effort put into even thinking like maybe her skin and her hair won't be seeable. She actually kind of got like the real short end of the stick. Like she just is not present.
Yeah. All right. So the next game is Shantae. And Shantae is also it was really successful on Kickstarter, made over 700K. It's a platformer starring a female belly dancer, and so that was really interesting. And on the sad side, it's been a little hard for WayForward to actually procure funds to make Shantae, new Shantae games, because it was a female character, and she also happens to be brown. So there have been some interesting ups and downs in here. Now, firstly, I'm really excited about Shantae because it's like really interesting. It's like a very fun game. It's very exciting. It has a female character. She's also brown. But things like this happened, where, for example, for a little bit of time, they lightened her art, and the fan base was like, whoa, 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 slow down. That's not cool. She was a brown character. Why is she now, like, super light-skinned? And so people were obviously getting really attached to the fact that there was this brown person being represented in a game. So later they actually fixed the color, and yeah, they didn't really talk about it very much, but they did address and correct it. So that was good on them for actually, coming back and saying, okay, we're gonna change your color back. But another issue is that if you've ever played Shantae, at least the versions that I have played, there are a lot of female characters, which is awesome, but most, if not all of them, are like just scantily clad. They have like very large breasts. They have very large noticeable like butts, and they have like their midriff is showing, and they're just very sexualized. So it's kind of uncomfortable being a woman playing this game, and I personally was very frustrated when I played it for the first time, because I was really excited for Shantae. Again, it's really cool to see this kind of person in a game. But then when I started playing it, I was like, oh my god, every character is like this. They're like all the same, model, the same build, and a lot of the guys had like a lot of body diversity and things like that, but like all the women were basically sexualized. And so that was really frustrating, because it's not like every woman has to be wearing like completely covered up things, or every woman has to be wearing nothing at all. It's really about having a mixture of all of it, because, some women want to wear revealing things, and that's fine, and some women don't want to wear revealing things, but by having all of them sexualized, it just makes it really uncomfortable for a lot of women and female identified people to play.
More sexy snake women for everyone. So I guess I'll go to a little vein, talk about my game for a bit. It's a beat 'em up with turn-based RPG elements, and I kind of started out making the game for my like of beat 'em ups, and as I worked on it, something kind of happened. I just kind of started thinking heavily about the need for representation in games, and also I needed money, so I ran a Kickstarter, which kind of ended up making about $50,000. And my Kickstarter updates highlighted the culture that I was pulling from, like graffiti, and trying not to be too ignorant about my own appropriation of it. And it actually kind of got me a couple of articles on Rock, Paper, Shotgun when Adam Smith found it, and he wrote about how it sounded like New York poetry. And talking about the importance of diversity in the game and how it was implementing it got me a lot of other interviews and a lot of fans. Also want to note that I guess I had like 10 be like a enemy in the game, and 5 of them were black people who were like, yeah, I want to really support this game. This is a guy that I barely know. Like, he's in my friend circle. He works a part-time job. He doesn't have money. He really likes Sprite. And when he saw this picture, he wanted to cry. He was like, holy shit, I'm in a video game. That's really awesome. And there's a gentleman in the front seat who I met online through this game, because he was like, yeah, brown people, sure, this game looks dope, and it's yeah, people had this genre interest, but then they were also like, oh, this guy is tackling these interesting issues too. And I mean, so also different games and the feminist gaming Illuminati logos are in there, among other ones, because people were like, yeah, why not? One guy, it was a guy who backed, and at the logo thing, and he said, "Hey, I thought a good thing would be to be the feminist gaming Illuminati," and then we talked it all out, and so like we were all on like an email chain to get permission to even use the logo, and then it was like so become friends over this whole thing, and kind of this thinking kind of created like weird systems dealing with oppression, like this class types, like you've got the main character right there who's fighting a cop and kind of a gentrifier in like the Lower East Side, which is kind of going through a lot of gentrification. And so then the class types, like the cop is unbalanced, the gentrifier just makes her more powerful, which is kind of how the world works. But I also ran into a lot of stumbling blocks just in my own thinking because I guess of the way writing and thinking about stuff is. Like I had this problem where a lot of the brown people were, because, I grew up in the hood and I know a lot of people that are in the hood, but I like kind of defined them by the hood, whereas I defined all the white people as like more gentrifying. And it's actually funny because my mom's white and she was labeled as a cop by all the Puerto Rican people in our neighborhood growing up because she was the only white person living there. But I had to actually rethink a lot of people's backgrounds and pull some people down and raise some people up, because you can't just define certain people by like where they're from, and you can't define people by where they move and what their intentions are. And then also there's this character who I specifically had a problem with where like I defined her kind of by the street harassment that she would get, and that was really weird. And so I sat down one day and I was just like, man, like this is bad. And so I kind of actually thought about her as like, because I actually modeled her like sprites after like Wolverine in X-Men versus Street Fighter, and like her play style and everything. So then I thought about, well, maybe she like liked comics a lot, and that like kind of like what happens in life, a bad thing happens and you get suspended from school, and then you're like, fuck this school. So then that was more like of an empowering thing, like she was a super smart person that just kind of got screwed over by everything. So, because I always want to make the enemies have some sort of redeeming quality, because that's also a problem with games, is that you just mow down all these people that don't matter.
Great. So I'm also going to be a little vain. So Prism Shell is actually a game that I created with two friends at Brooklyn Gamery. And so we're actually native New Yorkers, and we're now all based in Brooklyn, which is how the name kind of came about. And we actually originally formed our group because this game did really well at a hackathon, and we were like, yeah, let's go with it. So it's a mobile space shooter with a node-based mechanic, which you can kind of see here. You kind of jump around and stuff like that. And it was inspired by games like Gradius, but we wanted to do something for mobile and something with lasers. So yay lasers. But the other thing about this game is that it stars a black woman, and she's a pilot who's codenamed Beretta. Her inclusion is incredibly purposeful. I did that because I didn't see a lot of black women in space, like who does that? So I wanted to specifically have a black woman who's a pilot, who's determined, but not angry. Like I specifically also made her face to look confident, but not in that way where it's like traditional angry black woman, like she knows her stuff. And I also did write about the experience of designing her for Off-World. So something that was bad that I kind of did was originally the character was way lighter skinned, and that was because there was like this article that came out that was like, oh, in the future people are going to be like racially ambiguous and they're going to look kind of like this. And then I kept thinking about it, and I was like, why does whiteness equal the future? And so I just really decided to say, like, it doesn't matter what we think the future is going to look like. Here's what my version of the future is like. Here's my example of a black woman in space, in like 100, 200, 1,000 years. And the sad thing also was that in order to launch the game without eventually hating ourselves, we needed to kind of cut a lot of features because the game just grew in scale to a point where it was just basically impossible to finish with the three of us in the time that we had allotted. So we cut the story, but we still wanted to actually show the main character. So we have her on the title screen, which is also kind of a throwback to games from like 20 years ago where, you know, they would have a ship and you might have a person who was like on the box art and they were that main character. You knew they were in the ship, so you always know that Beretta is in there. She's a black woman. She's saving the world. We also actually put her in the trailer, and this is something we want to add in later as well in the actual game, because we want to just underscore again, this is the person who's operating the ship, and even though we didn't have time to actually include her background, she's still there and she's still incredibly important. Now, the other thing that this actually did was it actually invited a lot of people who might not have played this type of game to come over and try it out. We had a lot of kids, a lot of women, and like older people as well who were super interested in just trying out this game. And it was also very interesting to learn how to design like an interaction curve that older people could understand. Not that all old people can't understand things, obviously, but sometimes some people come in and they're like, oh, I haven't tried a mobile game before. How does this work? So we wanted to kind of make it as inclusive as possible to people. So we did a lot of play testing, and we just realized that having this character on the main screen also made it very interesting to a lot of different people. So it shows that even if your game isn't necessarily narrative driven, just by having certain character choices, you can actually you know, open your audience and, you know, kind of excite people and draw people into your game. So what we're going to do in the future is the next version of Prison Shell, which we're going to work on. We actually have already started designing her narrative and expanding upon who Beretta is. And the game, the first version of the game didn't do 100% well. Like we got a lot of great press and things like that, but we weren't working with a marketing team. So the main reason that it didn't do super well was because we didn't really know how marketing worked yet. And so we learned a lot in that regard as well.
Also, just to add that, like, part of the underscoring is that it was like people were like, man, you know, brown woman in front of the game, that's why it didn't sell. But, you know, it's like people often, you need to realize that, like, white dude first-person shooters often don't sell. There's a lot of them that you've never heard of. So I guess our conclusions. So creating characters from diverse backgrounds can invite, include, and intrigue people who often don't see themselves represented. It can make your work stand out in this industry where, you know, it's really hard to actually sell things these days. It can, and it also helps out in this industry where there's all these defaults, right? People just think of these defaults. And even if you don't see color, others do. And we all have a hand in, we all have to have a hand in making games more inclusive, because it can't just be like the brown people and the women making the brown people and the women games, because maybe we also want to make like weird shape things that are like one-dimensional and that are installations that aren't about the diverse experience. So someone else needs to do that occasionally too. And, you know, we're indies, and that means that, you know, we're not locked into this AAA hell where we can't change our work. What we do drastically, we can be more agile. We can create characters that are better, and we really should. There needs to really be no more games that star all white people. We should be thinking deeper about the motives for our characters. Like, how can our characters inform our game design, and vice versa? And we're urging that when people make games, that we think about different settings, places, and people who star in our games, and also avoid accidentally upholding oppressive systems while doing so. But we need everybody to be thinking differently. I mean, you could make a game about like dogs and cats that upholds systemic racism. Like, it's actually kind of easy.
Yep. Yeah, so the next bit, we're just going to kind of shout out some games really quick to check out that are, you know, kind of interesting, doing a pretty good job.
So Moonhunters, this actually just launched on Steam. It's set in ancient Mesopotamian lore, and it has a lot of brown people in it. And I don't know why, but people seem to make games about the cradle of civilization, make them all white.
Not anymore. Not anymore. Read-only memories, also really interesting, awesome. And by Midboss, the people behind GamerX, which is now GX. So this was Kickstarter supported, and it's got a lot of really interesting, diverse characters. I'm looking forward to seeing how they handle voice acting for them.
So we know, I mean, if you don't know this game is from Cameroon and Africa, and they've actually done a couple of Kickstarters. The second one was successful, thankfully, and I don't know, it's a very interesting game, and we often don't see games set in like African fantasy. And it's a little sad that it has to be an African team that is doing it, but at least people are actually supporting them.
And Undertale, which is also another Kickstarter game. The reason I liked this one was clear choices made regarding gender and skin color. So like the main character doesn't really have very much of a gender. A lot of people are referred to, or like a lot of characters are referred to as they. The character has brown skin, and it's super interesting. Although then gendering some of the characters was kind of like, But overall, it was a really interesting, quirky narrative game that definitely made me think a little bit. Thanks.